This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Jif peanut butter. It's that jiffing good, it doesn't really need advertising. So instead, enjoy the calming sounds of the ocean. Jif. Ooh, it's that jiffing good. Get your Jif at Jif.com.
Navigate the gauntlet of uncertainty the world throws at your business with SAP. Whether it's a tropical storm hitting your warehouse or a short supply of those little plastic twist ties, SAP can help you tackle those unexpected crushing setbacks with its AI-powered capabilities. To pivot to new suppliers, automate paperwork, and source the twist ties you need at the price you want, so your business can stay unstoppable. Learn more at sap.com/uncertainty.
Recently, we asked some people about sharing their New York Times accounts.
My name is Dana. I am a subscriber to the New York Times, but my husband isn't. And it would be really nice to be able to share a recipe or an article or compete with him in Wordle or Connections. Thank you.
Dana, we heard you. Introducing the New York Times Family Subscription. One subscription, up to 4 separate logins for anyone in your life. Find out more at nytimes.com/family.
I was deep in it, gaming on Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7. Unfolding the screen made it twice as big and so immersive, I kinda lost myself. Might have trolled a little too close to the sun. Someone in the chat told me to touch grass, so I took my Z Fold 7 outside and kept playing. Still won, got a tan, and a nice little reset. Powerful processor, realistic graphics, you stay locked in, streak stays alive. Can your phone do that?
The new Galaxy Z Fold 7. Get yours at Samsung.com.
Hey, thanks for listening to Reversing Climate Change. I'm your host, Ross Kenyon. Before we get going, I'd love to tell you a little bit about our sponsors. They make the show possible. I would love it if you could listen for just a minute while I tell you about Philip Lee, LLP, and Arbonics. If you work in carbon removal, you very well may have come across Philip Lee, LLP's work. I originally saw Philip Lee give a presentation about some of the common provisions within offtake agreements, and I was impressed by the quality of their scholarship and their work, and I'm happy that we were able to stay in touch and finally do this together. I think the law is an underrepresented part of what happens within carbon removal. We assume it's the background, we assume it's the mechanics. It actually takes a very smart and creative person to be a good lawyer. I think if you've ever had a bad lawyer, you know that there's quite a big difference between a good and a bad lawyer. And what's good about Philip Lee, beyond the good experience that I've had personally, is that they're also just the largest legal team dedicated to the financing and development of carbon projects globally. They actually were awarded Environmental Finance's VCM Law Firm of the Year for each of the last 2 previous years. And they have offices in the US, Europe, and the UK. If you have business law needs around nature-based carbon projects or engineered ones, if you're working with sustainable aviation fuels and the integration with CORSIA, anything to do with the VCM generally, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, the CRCF that's coming out of the EU now, get in touch with Philip Lee. If you're working in this space, you really do need a good eye to the law. These projects need legal care. There's a lot of structuring that takes place. It's really not turnkey at this point still. And there's a lot more innovation and creativity that's going to be needed to make sure that the legal infrastructure that supports carbon removal is there. So, link is in the show notes. Go check out Philip Lee. Our other sponsors are Arbonics. Arbonics is great. They've been on the podcast before. I did a show with Lizette Louique, which I'll link to in the show notes too if you want to go listen to that show I did with Lizette. Arbonics is working on forestry in the Baltic states of Europe. Europe used to be much more heavily forested. The great majority of forestry projects take place in the global south, which is generally a good thing, but we also do need forestry to take place in the EU and in Europe as well. Arbonics has put out some great research recently about the state of afforestation projects, about the bottlenecks in the industry, why the high quality credits are selling out far ahead of issuance, what that means for people who want to be buying carbon removal credits for forestry but cannot. It's a really important set of questions that Arbonics addresses with grace. I would recommend you checking out their work and also just checking out Arbonics in general. If you want to support forestry, give Arbonics a look. Link is in the show notes there. Thanks for listening, and now I will go into the show itself. Thanks for your time. Here it is. Okay, today you people are getting your money's worth. This show was originally pitched to me, at least partially, in reference to Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. I told today's guest that I would do the intro in a Hemingway-esque voice. It's really more Midnight in Paris than Hemingway himself, maybe. But all right, a little bit theatrical, but today's intro in the style of Ernest Hemingway. My name is Ross Kenyon. This is my podcast. It is about men and women who fight with risk and finance and carbon and time. It is about the struggle to make something real in a world that often feels unreal. You must rate it. 5 stars on Apple, 5 stars on Spotify. To give less is weakness. To give more is impossible. Write a review. Tell the truth. The truth will be seen and it will endure. If you have courage, subscribe. $5 each month on Spotify. You will hear more of the show. You will hear it without the dull rattle of automated ads. You will hear the bonus talks, the private talks, the talks that are for those who pay. $5 buys you that. $5 buys you the clean cut of the blade without the rust. This show is about carbon removal. It is about men who build projects, who take risk, who try to make wheels turn. Some wheels are strong, some wheels are broken. Many people do not know what makes a project live or die. But Ryan Covington of Philip Lee LLP knows. He knows bankability. He knows the weight of debt. He knows the steel in the ground and the paper on the banker's desk. We speak of buyers and sellers, of risk and of courage, of whether the market will turn away or lean in. It is not a small thing. It is not a game. It is the work of years and the measure of what kind of world we will have. This is a good talk. It is a true talk. You will learn from it. You will feel it. That is why we are here. That is why the show begins. Ryan, thank you for being here.
Pleasure. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah. First of all, j'accuse. I have an accusation against you. How dare you tell me how to use Bankability? I want to use it in however weird way I want to define it. I want to use project finance in ways that are disconnected from historical experience. Why do you deny me this?
That is a great question. I think it gets right to the heart of the issue, which is there seems to be within the carbon removal space a couple tendencies. One of the tendencies is a desire to reinvent the wheel when the wheel works perfectly fine. And there's
what about like a smoother wheel that's more elliptical than a purely spheroid object?
Perhaps, but I think the wheels that sometimes come out are oblong shaped or have a lot of right angles, and they don't exactly operate that well. So if there is a better wheel invented, I'd be more open to the tendency to reinvent. But I think the outcome oftentimes is a rather obtuse shape, to carry on the metaphor here. So we got one tendency in the space, which is let's reinvent the wheel for some reason. And then the other tendency is we typically look to the wrong parties, the wrong market participants to define different standards. And one of the biggest ones that we somehow found ourselves in looking to the wrong parties to define is bankability, right? Bankability, we can get into what it is, but it's a standard that's applied to much more mature markets. It's something that's in energy and infrastructure. It's a project-wide assessment that's undertaken by third-party funders to decide whether they want to deploy debt. There's a tried and true way of assessing that across energy and infrastructure markets and large-scale deployments. But because of the absence of true third-party financing within carbon removal specifically, we found ourselves looking to a few disparate voices to tell us what bankability is, or to kind of fill the void for a lack of threshold. And those participants are the ones that we're very well aware of. It's the large tech buyers oftentimes that are establishing market norms or terms. They're not necessarily telling us what is bankable. They're not telling us what terms will unlock third-party financing. They're telling us what they require to transact for their offtake. So I think and this is the second tendency I talked to, is I think we equate negotiation, leverage, or market cachet, or the volume associated with a particular voice, as a proxy for understanding these terms when those aren't the voices that we should be listening to necessarily for determining a very clear objective standard that's undertaken.
Do you think the big buyers that have enough market power to dictate terms like this, have they done something wrong? Is this within the bounds of normal commercial activity? Is this just what happens in a monopsonistic environment where buyers call the shots? What has led to this? And is this an okay state of affairs for our level of maturity, or do we make some terrible wrong turn here that's very unique?
Yeah, lots to unpack there. I don't think buyers have done anything wrong. In fact, I think buyers are being asked to do too much, frankly. And I think we're relying on the wrong profile of participants to send market signals and to provide catalytic capital because of the absence of true third-party funders entering the space, right? And so I think the buyers have found themselves propping up the voluntary carbon market, at least through pre-purchases, through off-takes, along with kind of catalytic pre-purchases, and they're being asked to kind of fill the void and dictate and continue to prop the space up. I think, so it's nothing that they've done wrong. And I think because of that immense role that they're playing in the space to send really important demand signals and to send signals to third-party financiers that this is a durable sector, that this is a sector where there is demand. I think we should, one, applaud their efforts and applaud the big buyers that are sticking their necks out to make long-term commitments in the space. I think there's a end of that conversation, though, which is that we should be engaging more with, and we are at Philip Lee certainly doing so, engaging with large historic infrastructure funders, large commodities traders, large institutional lenders as well, who have very clear-cut standards that they have to get through their investment committees in other sectors to define what's bankable. We're engaging with them to figure out what do you actually need to see in the projects to unlock that third-party financing that's sorely missing from the space. And I think if we bring in that profile of player more into the conversation, we actually ask, the Macquaries of the world, what do you require? What do you want to see? Or the JPMs of the world, what do you require? What do you require? What do you want to see? I think we're going to get a very clear answer to what that is, which we can talk about a bit more.
I think we're all looking for how to attract financiers like that into carbon removal. And there's been some nibbling at it, like the Standard Chartered support for some of these deals with Undo. And there's a couple of these things that are happening within climate tech broadly. But I have to think that if there is money to be made here, people are going to come and make that a reality, because that's just how business people work. Like, there's something to happen here. But there's some question about, is there technology risk, policy risk? Are the ticket sizes too small? Like, a lot of institutional money, the deals just aren't big enough at the stage of maturity for carbon removal to even catch their attention. Some of that is changing now. But is there even enough here to attract, people who would finance bridges or major infrastructure projects?
100% valid. There is, if we're talking about engineered carbon removal specifically, we're looking at tech efficacy risk. Does the tech actually do what it says it does at the level it says it can? We're looking at project execution risk. Can the tech developer that's wearing a project developer hat actually line up a contract with an EPC that can de-risk the project properly? Can they get through pre-feed and feed? Can they line up their transportation and storage arrangements in a way that are actually commercially viable and bankable, for the word of the day? There's a question of, is there proper government incentives? Is there a compliance market driver that's going to be the unlock? There's all kinds of questions within ECDR specifically that are keeping capital on the sidelines. So I think the question is not whether there's sufficient level of need right now for the third-party financing. I think there is, which we can talk about. I think there's also a question of what can you do now to establish the pillars necessary for the space that would unlock third-party financing for the commercial wave of deployments that need to occur before 2030 and throughout the 2030s, right? We can't just wait until 2029 and say, hey, everybody, commercial scale deployments are starting to come online. Let's rework all those offtakes that you signed that actually can't attract third-party financing. Or, hey, those are really lovely carbon transportation and storage agreements. No funder would ever deploy financing on this project because of the way that you structured your arrangement. The risks are unknown. The liability is too extreme. The project risk is allocated to project developer too much. There's all kinds of things that could come up, but you can't rewrite and then speed up through the process at the point in time when commercial scale deployments come on. Those deployments take years to actually develop, to get through early stage development, to actually get through build, to then get into operation, once you hit COD and be in operation. These are long-term infrastructure heavy projects. What have we relied on today? It's really two, maybe three forms of financing. One, it's venture capital funders, right? Traditional VCs, maybe climate VCs, maybe climate hardware VCs, but they're typically have played in a market where they're looking at off-the-shelf climate hardware tech. They're not looking for capital-intensive, infrastructure-intensive projects and how to finance them. That's not their space. So then that goes to the second one. Well, there's the large corporates that are either playing in BECCS themselves, doing large-scale BECCS projects themselves, cement players, other industrials are similar. You got the energy majors that are doing a model like Oxy that owns 1.5 in carbon engineering and bought Holocene as well, and they're doing on balance sheet financings essentially to actually get their projects deployed to a large extent, or they're providing via equity financings that the same VCs are co-participating in rounds or project level debt. So we've got these two. We've got VCs that are actually providing some money, but it's fickle. Like all VCs, it's market trends and it comes and goes, and it's not committed for large scale infrastructure. It's just not. As much as we've seen large rounds happen in the space, it's not going to be there when we need the dollar figures that we need to actually get commercial scale deployments done. It's dollar figures we need to get pilot scale deployments done, not true commercial scale deployments done. You've got corporates that can do it either on balance sheet or through subs. And then the last group is just this mismatch that we're relying on. Government incentives and grants, catalytic funding and grants through players like Breakthrough that are helping. But again, there's significant funding that's being supplied, but it's to help these project developers through this period where they're dual tracking tech de-risking at the same time as project de-risking, right? And it's to get a pilot done, to get an offtake done. And when we say pilot, because again, we're talking about the space using these terms that either can sound really small or really big or really important or really not, right? Pilot, when we're talking about a pilot, this is for DAC, for instance, this is 500 to 5,000 or 10,000 tons per annum that you're actually trying to remove, right? Small commercial scale is 20,000 to 50,000. Those are the projects to date that are being financed in the way that I'm talking about. We need to now move very quickly to a stage where we're at commercial scale, which is 100K to 500K tons removal capacity for projects coming online in 2028, 2029, 2030, and throughout the 2030s. So that the orders of magnitude of removal capacity is directly correlated to the orders of magnitude of dollars capacity that we need to unlock, capital capacity that we need to unlock, and who theoretically, if we can solve for that huge set of issues that you previewed up top, who can unlock that capital? I would like to think it's the project financiers who have a way of deploying capital against projects that are banked on future cash flows, right? That's what project financing is. Limited recourse, third-party financing banked on future cash flows generated by a specific project and secured by the assets of that project. It's not VC financing. It's not pre-purchases. It's not corporate balance sheet financing. It is third-party debt financing that's limited recourse in nature, that's banked on cash flows generated of a specific project. That's how simple the concept is. But instead, we equate project financing with everything else I'm talking about. So people then say, Ross, they say, well, wait a second. There's capital that's going into the space. The optics surely aren't the issue that's stopping more capital from coming, because VCs are contributing, corporates are interested, and there's some corporate strategics that are deploying more capital. But that's not who we're targeting. That's not the form of capital, the form of financing we're targeting for commercial scale. We're targeting something very specific, which is project finance or project finance, if you want to be a banker.
I flop between the two pronunciations, but finance definitely sounds a little bit, I don't know, snootier. My nose lifts up a little bit when I say it that way.
I was going to say, it depends on how full of myself I feel that day as to whether I say finance or finance.
Yeah, fair enough. I think in that second category, defined broadly enough, are the big joint ventures of someone like CO280. I did a show with them not long ago. Spent a lot of time on how to actually structure deals and the mechanics of them. And they've been very successful making joint ventures work. Is that an example of the second category? Is it something else? Are they as good as it looks in that episode? Is it not the right fit for lots of people? Sorry, I'm not really asking you one question at a time, am I? But you can take it any way you want.
They're a really interesting model. And I think it's a model that's going to be actually a pretty key unlock for the space. My understanding of CO280 is they're what's called like a tech agnostic project developer, meaning that it's not relying on kind of that dual tracking, or don't have to do the dual tracking of tech de-risking at the same time as project execution. And they're focusing heavily on wearing that project developer hat. And by doing so, this is very similar to Deep Sky out of Canada on the DAC side. And in doing so, what they're doing is they're saying, I'm going to rely on third parties who have longer histories of developing carbon capture technology or carbon removal technology. I'm going to go through all of the effort and pain of structuring my entity in a way that's actually financeable from third-party debts or venture capital or similar. I'm going to worry about all the kind of key participants that we need for EPC and O&M and similar. I'm going to actually vet those third-party tech enablers for the projects. I'm going to line up the key corporate strategic relationships with industrial players or energy majors or large landowners or similar, feedstock supplies, offtakes. Theoretically, what they can do is say, I'm going to be the one that sits at the center of all these projects and can map out how all the relationships work, which goes exactly to the conversation we're having today, which is, what is bankability, right? Because what CO280 theoretically can say is, well, hang on a second, I need to make sure my projects are bankable because I'm the project developer and I need to attract third-party financing or capital for these projects, right? So a CO280 would have to then say, okay, well, bankability is a project-wide assessment that a lender is going to go through, and they're going to say, have I identified all the project risks? Step one, have I identified all the project risks? So they're wearing a hat, 360-degree view, and they have the responsibility to actually identify all of them. The second thing that CO280, not a client, so can't tell you if they're doing it or not, but what a CO280 could do is actually mitigate the risk. So they can say, I've identified the risks. Here's the ones that I've dealt with by relying on third parties or insurance or other mechanisms to actually de-risk that issue. I've engaged with local governments, local communities, whatever it is, environmental consultants. The third step is I now have to go, okay, I've identified everything. I've mitigated what I could. There's some that's left over, and now I've got to allocate that project risk in a way that a funder can actually say, okay, I'm comfortable with the level of project risk that sits with project developer. I'm comfortable that your carbon transportation and storage provider is wrapping you sufficiently, for example. And because I'm so comfortable, I've gone through this project-wide assessment, I can now decide to give you debt and be confident that you're going to repay it. And not only am I confident that you're going to repay it, but in an ultimate downside scenario, I actually can say, I'm comfortable in my level of protection by way of the recourse I have via the security package that's given. I'm not saying that's what CO280 is doing currently. I can't, again, speak for them, but that's what a project developer is faced with doing. They're faced with mapping this whole world. The joint venture concept that you're talking about is a critical step in this process because you are leveraging industrial players with key knowledge that have built projects, that understand infrastructure, that understand risk, that understand this bankability assessment that's going on. You're speaking similar language, so you are de-risking for your funders, either VC or hopefully soon project financiers. You're de-risking the process. So it's an example of that second bucket that you're talking about, but it's one that can evolve into a broader, more impactful unlock for the space if you can leverage those JVs into ultimately project codes, SPV structures that are set up to do one single project, and then you can unlock that debt, assuming that we've controlled for all those other variables. So it is an example of where the space is going. It's not an example, as far as I understand it, of this kind of true project finance model where debt's being deployed against a specific project. But it's a really important step in this process that we're going along as a space collectively.
I've been cheering on the differentiation between project development and tech development. I might infer from your comments you were also cheering this on.
Usually.
Yeah. Why do you think it took us so long? Those things were co-located for years and years, and once it happened, I started seeing people focus on this. I'm like, well, the same thing happened. Obviously, people who work in forestry are project developers, and they're not all foresters. Now, why did it take us this long to just become project development people?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest impediments to the space in terms of its growth and what's held it back is actually the reluctance to embrace more delineated and sophisticated roles on projects in a manner that more traditional industry has done. I think that's in terms of why we haven't embraced it just yet. And obviously, Oxy via 1.5 has. They've set up a project developer and they bought tech from third parties, and that's their model. So there are some that have done so. I think one of the issues is that the tech enablers are so close to their actual underlying tech, and the surprise that they're seen as the ones that can best de-risk it, and they're de-risking it via deployments, pilot deployments, which is largely what we have. And so and they were being venture capital finance. So I think there's this assumption that let the tech developers develop the tech, see how it plays out in reality, and we don't have to worry about all these other kind of larger participants who have built these projects as much. Maybe we get a EPC involved in the pre-feed stage for some kind of engineering support. But for large part, we just need to get this out into the wild and see how it performs, and we go from there. That is a model that is more acceptable or more understandable at pilot. It's way less understandable when you actually jump to small commercial scale or true commercial scale. You can't in earnest develop, I think, dual track that unless you have a very sophisticated infrastructure that's built internally to do project development. And it's very clear that that's one whole business vertical is project development and another one that's tech enabling. And that's a completely different vertical. When you try to get people to speak the same language, I think that's where we've had issues. And I think, quite honestly, this gets to kind of the interface with like offtakes even, is we've used the offtake in this model of tech enabler and project developer even. We've used the offtake as a market signal. But who are we signaling to? We're signaling to VCs and corporate strategics that might be interested. We're saying, look, my tech is validated, not my project execution capacity, not my sophistication as a project developer. My tech is de-risked sufficiently that I got a large buyer to commit to an offtake, and therefore venture capital firms that are getting hundreds of decks of project developers or tech enablers, I want you to lead my my seed or Series A or a Series B or similar, because look, I've got market demand signal for my project. That's a tech validation largely because you're proving and you're speaking a language to both VCs and corporate strategics who might want to acquire that tech or have access to that tech for their own use. You're speaking a language that says this tech is ready to be used. You're not speaking a language necessarily to say, I'm ready to go across multiple jurisdictions, to interface across multiple governments and regulatory regimes, and talk with multiple funders and different stakeholders, and create a project at a scale that's akin to developing a solar farm or a onshore offshore wind farm or something similar. These are really complex projects. So I think something that's happening is that for these dual hat tech developers, project developers, at minimum, we're seeing a greater emphasis on the two verticals. Tell me how your tech works. Awesome. Let's figure out, let's DD it. Let's see if it actually does what it says. Equally important, who do you have on your team that's come from traditional energy and infra? What corporate strategic do you have in your back pocket to actually help you with this? What industrial player is supporting you or giving you access or otherwise interested? It's a question of who is going to help unlock large-scale deployments, not does your tech work. So that offtake in that context, to round that out, and appreciate I'm like very long-winded on this, that offtake in that context, it's less important how it fits into commercial scale deployments if what we're looking for is how does this unlock and keep tech developers scaling to enable them to ultimately reach commercial scale. That's a different conversation than can the offtake underpin a financing that unlocks the commercial scale. So what can help us get there versus what is necessary to actually get the project deployed.
At Thales, we know cybersecurity can be tough and you can't protect everything, but with Thales, you can secure what matters most. With Thales industry-leading platforms, you can protect critical applications, data, and identities anywhere and at scale with the highest ROI. That's why the most trusted brands and largest banks, retailers, and healthcare companies in the world rely on Thales to protect what matters most: applications, data, and identities. That's Thales, Thales. Learn more at thalesgroup.com/cyber.
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
I think that's very astute. My speculation for why this might be, I'd be curious of your own as well, is I think software culturally calls the shots, and everyone likes the idea of the 20-something or 30-something founder having a dream and then building the next, world-beating brand. And for that happening for carbon removal. But as I've grown more experience as a business person and within carbon removal, the teams that I gravitate towards tend to have more age and more experience, and they do have some of that conventional infra and energy. Like, have you put steel in the ground? Have you made some stuff happen? You're not just someone who worked in a lab and is commercializing tech coming out of university. No shade against that. We need that too. But if there's some way to differentiate these business models and say, we're a tech developer, we don't want to do project development. Our goal is to license this to the corporate strategics in this area, and that's our go-to-market, actually. I think if I was diligencing a deal for a VC, I would treat that much more seriously because they have acknowledged their limits. Whereas this idea that we're going to do all of this stuff, science, engineering, commercial, we're good at it all. And I feel like, is there a full stack carbon removal company like that can do it? There are a couple who are doing fairly well, perhaps. But overall, I think that expectation is just like the Iron Man configuration of business expertise.
100% agree with that assessment. I think that we're seeing out of Hopefully, we work a ton with engineered carbon removal project developers. We also work on the the funder side as well. And I think we're seeing and we're coaching our clients through that process of being comfortable with the tech licensing play or manufacturing play. We're coaching them through pursuing deployment opportunities where they're tech enabler or maybe project developer at a smaller scale, and seeing which one fits in their business model more, which one's actually workable, what speaks to their skill set. We're looking at opportunities to unlock in different jurisdictions and climates and situations. And I think a big one, honestly, that's a key unlock in what you're talking about is, even if you're a tech developer that wants to be involved in the project deployment process, having informing relationships with corporate strategics and other industrial players to be the unlock is incredibly key. So to answer or to react to what you're saying, I don't think it's necessarily somebody's 100% figured it out how to kind of wear all hats and do all things. I think that there's a realization increasingly that you can't. And I think it's a question of how do you specifically build a stack and offering that enables your tech to get out in the wild and used. And it might be that you realize that it's through licensing. It might be that you're a project developer with a corporate strategic, a JV with somebody that actually helps unlock those projects. But typically the one-stop shop, I can do it all mentality hasn't exactly worked in the space. And so I think there's a assumption of greater sophistication and delineation of roles that's coming.
Dang, I would love to just see the numbers for, if you're a company out there and you're listening and you are pursuing a licensing only tech development carbon removal pathway, I'd love to hear from you, because I'm wondering how those numbers actually do pencil. Can they justify a venture capitalist portfolio figures? Like, can that fit inside there anymore? Because they're going to be sharing a lot of the upside with the actual deployment people, and that might actually make it harder to receive that type of funding, in which case, what happens to those licensing only companies? Do they have a go-to-market that could be successful?
Yeah, and the space has already seen this work, right? I mean, there are examples of players in the space, like Capsule, for instance, that's been essentially an OEM, a developer of technology that's carbon capture technology that can be used and de-risked for various projects. So I don't think that this is a new concept necessarily. Svante historically as well, in terms of like developing actual carbon capture technology. So I think there's a model that's proven out and has successfully scaled in the space in terms of having that clear role. I don't think there's a one size fits all to that approach either. I think these approaches take different forms, right? Essentially, carbon engineering, as far as I understand it, is serving as the de facto or the actual R&D arm for Oxy's low carbon solutions team, and they're engaging with 1.5, right? They've definitely are a Oxy sub and directly linked to it, but their go-to-market strategy was, we're the tech developers, we're the R&D developers, and we now have the corporate backing of a large energy player that can help support our scaling. And I think there's different softer variations of that, where we're seeing clients that are engaging with different industries for different licensing, partnership, project deployment arrangements that fit within that industrial player's viewpoint. It could be co-location on site. It could be with a view towards using their third-party transportation, or they're using their transportation and storage infrastructure that's being developed out. It could be for access to carbon credits that are generated by the projects. There's a number of different ways that we're seeing that tech player get their tech out into the wild that can be a VC play. It can't be a corporate strategic play, or it can't be just I'm going to scale this up and I'm going to be the third-party de-risker for it. I think there is a question now, is like, I tell a lot of people when they're looking at the engineered carbon removal space that right now we're in the prove it phase, right? All these technologies are in a prove it phase. We've gone past the hype phase. That's come and gone very clearly in the space, and we're now in the prove it phase. And we're going to see, I suspect, immense consolidation in the space over the next 2 years up to 2027 during this prove it phase. And I think there's naturally going to be, via that consolidation, clearer roles, and there's going to be the winners that come out in the 2028, 2029, 2030 deployment stage level. So I think there's going to be natural pressure that's coming from the top down that's going to make your role clearer if you don't already have a clear role, because of how much pressure there is right now to stand out and actually prove that your tech works or that your project deployment strategy works.
And ignore that big comment you just dropped on us. How dare you say there's going to be consolidation? Our industry should never face that.
Consolidation's a polite word, though, right? It doesn't sound as bad when you put it that way.
That's true. I took a meeting a while ago with a venture studio, and they had a model that I really liked where this is not unique to them. This is fairly common, but they pointed it out to me very clearly that one strategy is to look at what large agribusiness or some other large, well-capitalized industry has set out for their goals for the next couple of years, and then just reverse engineers companies for acquisition by the people that have money. And I would love to see it. I read a lot of decks. A lot of decks come my way for various reasons. And I almost never see anything that's licensing oriented as their main go-to-market. But I also would just love to see, we just want to be acquired by, like, Oxy is the only one who's really bought a lot of carbon removal stuff today. It's only a couple companies. So we're just going to design sorbent technology that is compatible but different. We have IP that we can sell to them or license to them. That's just what we're going to do. I would be like, all right, this is maybe a single or a double if you're a VC. Like, that's not going to be some huge portfolio justifying return. But they're probably going to make money on it if you think that that deal gets diligenced successfully and they're on the right track with this. That's a pretty good thing. I'm wondering, is there anyone out there with the strategy for that? Because someone is probably going to figure it out and make some money doing it. Maybe there's probably just too much political risk and market risk right now facing carbon removal to feel secure. It's not like doing that for hardware or consumer goods. But I love that idea. I'd love to see someone do it. If you're listening and you have money, feel free to take that idea and run with it. It's not mine. It belongs to the universe, basically.
Yeah, I think there's something that's really interesting that's going on, and this could be the understatement of the century. There's something really interesting going on in Trump's America.
Wow, you are so smart. Wow.
Love that. There's something really interesting. Yeah. There's something that doesn't get talked about enough within the carbon removal space, and I think it's difficult to talk about because of the confidentiality and sensitivity in the current climate that we're operating in, is that the type of deal structures that you're talking about are advancing in the background very quietly for deployments in North America, Europe, Middle East, and elsewhere. And I think there's a tendency, again, if we're going to kind of bring this conversation back, we look for very clear market signals. Have you signed an offtake with the biggest buyer in the space or with Frontier or similar? Have you gone in through your Series A and who's on your investor deck? Well, we're not hearing the space because we can't talk about it, is the number of corporate strategic partnerships that are being entered into in the background and have been entered into even pre-Trump that are going on, not necessarily as planned, but with a lot of interest and sophistication that are going to shape who the players are that come out successfully. I know I'm being very vague here, but I think that if people are assuming that venture capital, non-corporate strategic venture capital is the unlock for the space, and that's the way that we decide whether the space is doing well or not. What I would say is, and what we advise a lot of our clients to do is, yes, of course, you have to get through that if that's part of your scale-up effort. And yes, you need to have VCs on your table that understand it. But you really need to be engaging with various industry players who have the capital and the decades of experience in getting energy infrastructure or other industrial projects built. And if you're not, you're going to find yourself in the back of the queue for project deployment opportunities, project finance availability, and even VC funding, because you're going to have lost out on a ton of momentum that's being built very quietly behind the scenes right now. Again, intentionally very vague and amorphous in terms of what I'm saying, But what I would say is that viewpoint that you're talking about is ones that very successful project developers are painstakingly following in the background, very, very quietly, rather than kind of putting their hand up to say what they're doing. And I suspect that if you're being strategic and diversifying your partners during this period of uncertainty, especially in Trump's America, I think that's a huge, huge positive for your chances of kind of coming out the other side of this prove it phase and being there for having your tech deployed or you building your projects, if you're doing a project developer hat, come commercial scale phase that we're all looking for.
It was a bit amorphous, but all it really proves is that you have your JD. I think
that's right.
I believe it now. I don't even need to look you up.
Yeah, that's right.
Pass the bar? No, the comment proves it.
How do you say the most was saying the least, right? Or saying the least by saying the most, which way it goes.
It wasn't that. It's very sensible advice. If people are able to plug into existing industries that have far-sighted companies that know that 45Q and things adjacent to it are going to be okay through the Trump years, and whatever comes after it is likely going to re-enhance carbon removal status and political options, that's a good thing to do. Or companies that just know that they need to do it for their own reasons. Like if agribusiness knows that fertility is not improving and topsoil loss is real, that biochar can maybe help with it and drought resilience, then okay, those are good things to be plugging into right now that do not have the political risk that just VCM or policy dependence creates for it. That's almost very commonplace at this point, where people are saying, like, are there alternative go-to-markets here that we can cotton on to that are not just, please, can we have some money, Microsoft? We're really interesting. Come take a look.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, there's a whole different segment of people that you should be talking to either directly or through those partnerships, which is the project financiers, right? So this isn't a theoretical. We're starting to see it actually play out in terms of offtake conversations, transportation and storage arrangements and negotiations and how they're structured. If you're not, if you don't have visibility into what a lender requires in terms of assessing the bankability of your project and whether your offtake is bankable, for example, you're leaving a ton of leverage on the table in your negotiation with those limited significant buyers in the space. And what I'm saying is, if third-party funding is a key unlock for your projects, that means that you should be talking with or having an advisor that's familiar with, or a corporate strategic that has a relationship with the funder that would actually sit down and look at your offtake and say, okay, let me look at this offtake. Okay, my first question, how committed or how firm is this offtake? Are the delivery obligations clear? Is there certain delivery volumes? Is there certainty around obligations to actually take and pay? I'm going to look at whether your under delivery regime, shortfall regime, is pre-baked, and does it actually say what happens in a scenario where you have interim shortfalls and how do we deal with it? Or does it have this really gray, amorphous, let's agree to agree what happens in the case of this, and what does a replacement credit mean, even if that's a remedy, right? If you're, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh no, I'm just reacting. Yeah, like I that is not good enough. I would be very scared if a contract was past me that looked like that.
Exactly. So you're looking at, if you don't know that a lender or a corporate strategic, but especially a lender, is ultimately going to say, I need to be able to pick this up and see that this is a firm offtake, that you don't have overly broad force majeure regimes or change in law regimes that are too clunky, or you don't talk about what happens in terms of change in methodology. How do you plan for it? You need to have certainty, committed, and not be able to underpin it. You want to look at it and say, I'm going to pick up this offtake. I'm going to deploy debt against this. What's your maximum exposure under this? How do you quantify it? Can it be quantifiable, and how's it allocated? What does your interim damages regime look like and remedies? What does your termination damages regime look like, and is it appropriate? How is it undermined or influenced by things like indemnification obligations, right? These are all questions that lenders will ask and do ask already within carbon removal, and ask on every single energy and infrastructure project. They're going to say, what's the creditworthiness and what's the credit support required for this to backstop the obligations of both the project developer and buyer side? And then the last one they're going to say is, what does this offtake do? How does it interface with, does it integrate the terms of the rest of the project? Or is this just an off-the-shelf template that didn't move and it's not fit for purpose for this project and it doesn't account for or pass through all the liabilities? That framework that I just said, the 4 kind of key questions, every lender will ask those 4 questions and have numerous DD follow-ups to get to the point of it. And that's for the offtake only. So if you don't have right now project developers, tech developers, somebody on your team or an advisor or a corporate strategic, or you're not talking with those funders already to say, please tell me what your requirements are, and you're not saying back to the buyers that this is what's needed, then you are going to be behind. You are behind in the process, because bringing in those concepts and bringing in those viewpoints is what's getting project finance down. Look at what Chestnut Carbon did in the nature space. They got an actual deal done with Microsoft as the cornerstone, with an offtake that was sufficiently bankable on top of the security package that was given for it to get JPM to provide debt to it. That happened in nature. And I know that there's project financing conversations that are going on to bring those players into the space for engineered carbon removal specifically. And how are they doing it? They're leveraging those viewpoints and those requirements in a way that you can actually have not leverage or balance in the negotiations. That's not a realistic expectation, but you can have the core levers and red flags that you know are going to be deal killers for you if that's the way that you're going to finance your project. So again, to kind of round out that conversation about who are you talking to, how do you get ahead, who's going to come out the other side, if nobody is actually directly coming from the funder's viewpoint and mouth, then all we're doing is regurgitating assumptions and guesses as to what's going to be required, rather than saying we know with certainty what is required on top of all the questions that you set up top. So I think that we're seeing those players engaged more, and it just needs to happen at a higher and higher rate.
Couldn't we finance carbon removal just because it's the right thing to do?
I would love that.
I thought you go for the Hemingway quote, man.
Oh, is that no? But isn't it free to think so? Of course. But isn't it free to think so? That's right. That's right.
I asked my beautiful, if naive question, hoping to trigger that. I didn't take the bait.
Yeah. No. Yeah. You need to run the video back, and I can come in eloquently and just drop that one. Right. But that's fitting, right? That's the Hemingway nature of the podcast, right? Is that even for the most perfect opportunity, theoretically, something inevitably, some ball gets dropped. No pun intended.
Yeah, I love that we were talking about the origins for this show and the rather literary nature of the show. It's funny, the show will sometimes have like hardcore business mechanics, like we talked about today, and then there'll be a show that's just like, okay, we're starting with Dostoevsky now. This is where we're going. But you were a Hemingway fan. We were talking about The Sun Also Rises and the conclusion to that. Reread it. I don't think I've read it since high school. Really enjoyed it, but I don't think I understood it when I first read it. It's a much sadder book than I recall.
I had the same exact response. I read that book in high school. I was 17, living in Belgium, and I had a teacher called Mr. Novak, and our entire 12th grade English class was called Finding Hemingway. And so we read the kind of complete works of Hemingway, and then we actually took a trip as a class, a small AP Lit class, to Paris, and we did a week going to like the cafes that he wrote at and sat there and wrote and drank where he drank. And my reaction was, one, why did I think that I had any understanding of what Hemingway was saying at 17? I remember vividly being like, I get it. I really get what he's going for here. And I just reread it on the lead up to this podcast also. And I was like, I had no idea what he was saying in the book about loss and let down and what could have been and should have been, and how you deal with that letdown, and whether it's worth embracing or holding on to hope or letting it go. or just kind of having this Zen-like understanding come out of it, which is just that there's a theoretical world that's pretty to think about and you can understand and appreciate, but you just got to give it up or give up the hope along the way at some point. Which, to tie into ECDR, we shouldn't. We shouldn't give up. We shouldn't give up the hope, and we should also not have a Hemingway-like approach where we put concepts of love or understanding and these far and lofty platonic ideals that can never be approachable and are just to give you heartbreak along the way. So we've got to pivot away from positives being hurtful past to inevitable letdown, and instead we can kind of bridge what is a space that's full of its fair share of losses, but also some good wins, and say, look, there's a very clear path towards happiness and love, and Lady Brett and Jake and the ECDR space can finally run off together and have a few absinthe drinks and look back and say, it's not only pretty to think about, but we've actually done it. We've actually done it. Go back to Pamplona, actually run this time rather than looking at the bulls from above a balcony.
I love it. Somehow you pulled it off. I was like, this might be a little shoehorny, but it actually all fit together so nicely. And I oscillate between having a sort of capital R romantic hope and really resenting in some ways how mechanical and financial a lot of carbon removal and climate action is, and just like respecting and appreciating the activists who are just like, none of that stuff really matters. We've sort of lost the plot if that's where our head's at. And the dialectic between those two is where I tend to hang out. It doesn't necessarily make me the most contented of person working in carbon removal, but it does make me think. And I think maybe that's the most one can hope for. Also kind of a Hemingway-esque attitude as well. He didn't strike me as the most contented of men either.
No, it doesn't.
Ryan, thanks for being here. I learned a lot. Thanks for letting me ask all my questions about project finance and bankability and also some Hemingway.
Pleasure. No, appreciate you having me on. Appreciate all the conversations that you're having in the space through your podcast. And look, these are we barely touched on the surface of a lot of these issues, and a lot of people in the space working on the same thing. So happy to have conversations with anybody else that's trying to tackle this as well, and appreciate you kind of putting this conversation more into the mainstream and kind of front and center as people start to look at a bit more nuance in the space and issues that are actually stopping projects from getting deployed and capital actually entering. So appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank you, Ryan.